The button, thanks to this guy here, Kevin Full, he travels around the country to various Drupal camps and records all these sessions, and they immediately get posted to YouTube, and so there's this vast archive of years and years of sessions that people can go back and watch, and I historically forget to press that button, so I've sort of made sure this time to remind myself. So, okay, small group today. Thanks for coming out on a beautiful Saturday morning. You are at How to Keep Your Drupal 8 Site Alive, a step-by-step manual for the complete idiot. My name is Tim, and I am the technical director at a great Drupal agency in Minneapolis, Minnesota called Electric Citizen, where we work mostly in the public sector building Drupal sites. So I started building on the web professionally in 1994, and with Drupal, I think when Drupal 5 came out in 2007. And sort of for most of my career, I've sort of been the last line of defense when something breaks or a client calls in and says, what's going on? Or another developer breaks something. That's sort of always been my job. And over the years, as we've hired people, and we often work with on-site developers at a client site. And so this session is the session that I wish I could give to those people who are either new to Drupal or in particular Drupal 8. And just as a way to sort of level up everyone's game when it comes to how to work with what a Drupal site is and how to keep it alive. So this is a picture of John Muir, who was a UC Berkeley engineering graduate in the 1960s and had a fancy government job as a structural engineer. And he, in the height of the 60s, dropped out of society kind of and grew his hair out and spent the rest of his life in Taos, New Mexico, writing and fixing air-cooled Volkswagens. And in 1969, he self-published this book, which this session is sort of inspired by, How to Keep Your Volkswagen Alive, a manual of step-by-step procedures for the complete idiot. Now, when I was 16, I saved up all my money and bought a $500 rusted-out, broken-down Volkswagen Bug, and I thought it was the greatest thing in the world, and I stumbled upon this book sort of randomly in a bookstore, and over the next 10 years it kind of became my Bible, and I owned a series of probably 10 different Volkswagens, buses, squarebacks, bugs, and this book sort of took me from a dumb 16-year-old whose previous experience was sort of holding the flashlight for his dad to, by the time I was 26, literally rebuilding an engine, which is a chapter in this book, How to Rebuild an Engine, and sort of later in life, I sort of realized how that 10 years of my life, I sort of, spent driving around the country in a Volkswagen van, and I skipped college for many years. I started to realize how directly a lot of the stuff that I learned in this book, and by the way, this is a self-published book that went on to sell 2 million copies in its first year because the Volkswagens were so popular back then, and a lot of people say that it sort of inspired the famous For Dummies books that came out in the 80s. So it really, and it's now in its 19th edition, you can still buy it today, and so this session is sort of in tribute to that, and using some of the lessons and language from the book and translating it to Drupal. So I like when I give a session to sort of give a quick brief overview of what we're going to cover. You'll be happy to know that the book itself has 24 chapters. It's 500 pages long, and as I started working on this session, I was going to do a chapter-by-chapter recreation, and quickly realized that we'd be here for 6 hours if I did that, so thankfully for you, I've brought this down to 6 chapters. We're going to talk real briefly about how to use some of the information in this session, no matter where you are at in your Drupal career, whether you're brand new or experienced. We're going to talk briefly about how Drupal works, sort of all of the different components in the system, much like a car, because you need to know lots of things that you might not be touching directly if you're trying to keep a Drupal 8 site alive. This is one of my favorite chapters, Tools and Spare Parts. We're going to run through, I think, a comprehensive list of all the tools that I use every day, the tools I teach my coworkers or co-developers to use, and the things that you'll need to help keep a Drupal site alive. Chapter 4, Flat Tire, he has this great chapter like, okay, look, this is a 500-page book that ends in telling you how to rebuild an engine, but let's settle down and talk about a flat tire. So here we're going to talk about some of the most common problems and fixes in a Drupal site. And then we go to engine stops or won't start, which is the white screen of death or horrible error messages or things that you simply can't figure out and how to approach that type of problem. And then lastly, he had a great chapter called Know-How, which was just a grab bag of tips that he had learned over the years, like, bang on this with a hammer and maybe it will work. So that's where we're going. So how to use this book. He says in chapter 1, read it like a novel, and I think his intent there is sort of like to truly understand how to keep something alive, and to fix it you need to know the characters, the protagonists and the antagonists, and the plot lines. And it's not this idea of like, oh, here's your problem, here's your fix. It's sort of understanding the full story of what is involved. And then, of course, I tried to make this, it was really difficult, but I tried to make this session follow this principle of giving you some sort of answer for every problem that you might run into, whether it's, again, a white screen of death or some error that you don't understand. My hope is that this session will give you some direction to keep moving forward. And then this is how he ends the chapters. The procedures may read like gibberish in the living room in front of the fire, but will become clear as you work directly with the hardware. And this is so true. You know, you don't, until you're underneath a Volkswagen with the undercarriage scraping your nose with your elbows bent and trying to adjust your valves, you know, you can read about that 1,000 times or listen to someone like me do it, but until you are you know, on your server, parsing your logs, looking for a specific error from a specific module, it's really one of those things that you need to just do and learn by doing. Okay, so how works a Volkswagen? How works a Drupal site? So again, the intent of this chapter was just to sort of give you a full understanding of the ignition system and the drivetrain and all of the different components that make up a car and all of the things that need to work together for it to run. So of course in Drupal 8, it runs on, and to be honest, at least twice a year we get a call from a client who's heard about Drupal, but they don't know quite what it is. It's like, well, what exactly is it? You know, is it a database? And of course, it runs on what we know as the LAMP stack, which is Linux or sometimes Windows. That's your operating system, of course, your web server. I left those in white because, to be honest with you, the modern day Drupal developer, unless you're a sysadmin or running your own server, and if you are, God bless you, but we're going to talk more about that later, but very rarely am I or anyone else worrying about those top two parts in the stack. Much more often, you're going to be diagnosing problems that are directly in your database or directly in your PHP code. And then, of course, in Drupal 8, we have the front end, which I myself am a back-end developer. I do very little front-end development these days, but I have a very large appreciation for the amount of complexity in a modern Drupal site that is happening on the front end, in particular with Twig. In Drupal 8, vast portions of the functionality of a site that you might have used to do in views or in a custom module are now done in Twig. And you absolutely need to at least understand the principles of Twig and how it's rendering pages and how to debug Twig, and we're going to get to that later, in order to understand and work with a modern Drupal site. Because often, when a client calls with some issue or problem, or there's something happening that's not supposed to, the blame will be right here in Twig. And or, of course, jQuery and CSS, which a lot of people say, oh, it's simple. It's not. It's a language on its own that can be very complex and have a lot to do with the site. And then, of course, if you were here yesterday, you probably saw like 3 or 4 sessions about Jamstack and Gatsby and React or Angular. We're not going to cover that today, but that's yet another level of complexity on a modern Drupal 8 site. And then, of course, in Drupal 8 itself, I'm not going to go through all these, but very clearly, these in yellow here, these are just key fundamental principles of Drupal and components and functions that even if you are not working in any one of these areas directly, you absolutely sort of need to understand something about how all of these components come together. Because if you don't know what a pre-process function is, which of course is in your theme file or in a module, that's doing something to change the data in your Drupal, and that's causing problems, you will have no idea where to look, whether it's in your theme file or in your module. So again, someone could spend, I could give a full 45-minute session pretty much on any one of these bullet points, and so we're not going to obviously do that now, but it's just another reinforcement of how complex Drupal 8 is and how you need to sort of have that holistic understanding of it as a system. Which is his point here. One definition of a mechanic is someone who looks at an automobile as a system and just making it your job to understand how the LAMP stack and the front end and the back end and all of these sort of unique components of Drupal are playing together in the system. Okay, chapter 3, tools and spare parts. This quote here will be very familiar to anyone who has gone on the journey from Drupal 5 to Drupal 6 to Drupal 7 to Drupal 8. Frankly, as everyone probably who's worked with Drupal 8 knows, it has become vastly more complicated than any previous version before it. And as a result, the tooling that you need to keep it alive is just as complicated. New things to learn. This is actually a picture of some of the old tools I saved in my day. Some of them are sort of specialty tools that you can read about, like, oh, how do I use this compression tester? But until you have that in there, into the spark plug hole, reading your compression ratings, it's just one of those things. It's and as we go through these tools, I'll give some examples of how you use some of these specialty tools in Drupal. So he had this great thing called the Phase 1 Toolkit, and the idea here was that if you had all of these tools in a little box somewhere, you would be able to solve 95% of all your problems. I'm surprised that he missed duct tape, which was a common thing that I used, but nonetheless, you'll see lots of familiar tools like pliers and screwdrivers, but then you start to see some of these specialty tools like a compression tester, a tach dwell meter, and a feeler gauge, things that at 16 I had no idea what they were and was sort of so excited to jump in and learn what these tools were and how to use them to keep my Volkswagen alive. So, in addition to the tool, I included, I don't consider this hosting and infrastructure necessarily a tool. It's more like sort of your highway system or your roads that your Drupal site is going to live on, and just like all of the other tools that have come along with Drupal 8, the sort of hosting requirements are now, it's no longer, in my opinion, at all wise or acceptable to try to host your Drupal 8 site on a shared hosting platform and hope for the best. And I've kept these in gray here, and these Pantheon, Aqua, and Platform are sort of considered the big three in modern day hosting, Drupal hosting, I should say. We do have some clients who can't afford that, and so we end up sort of using one of these lesser solutions, and I'll explain why in a second. And of course, in a modern day Drupal site, often your code is stored in GitHub, and maybe it's getting pushed through what's called a continuous integration server, and then finally pushed up to your hosting platform. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, but it's important to be aware of how your hosting platform can, just about all of those platforms that I put up are going to run a Drupal site fine. But if what you're looking for in this, the big three, Aqua, Pantheon, and Platform.sh, sort of cover all of these things. Multiple environments so that your coders and your debuggers can quickly spin up a site and have a client look at it, or quickly clone a site. Git integration, I think, is essential for a modern hosting platform. And this one, easy deploys and developer experience. If you're fixing a Drupal site that's broken and has a Server 500 error, and the client is on the phone saying, what is going on, you want to be able to sort of safely and flawlessly deploy your fixes, and of course, automated backups and restores. It's an important piece of the puzzle, having a good, solid hosting platform. Now, again, so in the vendor hall downstairs, I believe Ddev, Lando, and Doxel all have tables. These are all tools to build a local copy of your Drupal site. And I would say, in the Drupal 6 and 7 days, a lot of people are using things like MAMP or WAMP or Dev Desktop, or maybe installing a custom version of PHP and MySQL on your server and using that to run your local site. But I would say that in Drupal 8 it is not optional, absolutely critical that you have a reliable, fast, and easy local development platform where you, in an instant. Yep?
Are you saying that LAMP or MAMP are not preferred?
They are not, for a few of these reasons here. Recreate production in an instant. One of the things, so we do still run across people who are using MAMP or Aqua Dev Desktop, but the beauties of those three systems, there are four, Drupal VM, Lando, Doxel, and Ddev, are that they are either using Docker or a Vagrant container that often, for example, Lando has a Docker container that just about matches exactly Pantheon's Docker container, and with one command. We happen to use Doxel at our company. We did use Lando for quite a while, and actually moved to Doxel for performance on Macs specifically, where we found Lando to be quite slow. But the idea is that this just happened to me on Wednesday before I flew out, right before my flight. I got a call from a client saying, hey, when we go to our admin people page, we get this website is not available. I quickly go and look. Sure enough, I also go to admin modules, website not available. Most of the admin pages were unavailable. So I could have gone into server logs, etc., and started trying to diagnose the problem or turned on my database logging, but instead, with one command, I was able to, I typed finsync, and within 5 minutes, I had an exact clone of that site with error reporting enabled, and we're going to go into more of this stuff in a future chapter, and was instantly able to see what the problem was without ever having to log into the production server, without ever having to dig through server logs. So it's very critical, I think, to have that sort of, and they're all, you know, they're different. I'd encourage you to play around with them, but they're all at heart sort of designed to be very easy for non-technical users to sort of spin up and do this kind of thing with your local Drupal site. So again, Composer, I consider it not optional, even though right now you could go to Drupal.org and download a tarball and try to install it that way, or push it up through FTP, or, you know, excuse me, it almost disappoints me that that is even an option, because Composer has become so critical to both building, updating, and fixing Drupal sites that it's just not an option. So again, someone could give an hour-long session just on Composer, but these are just some of the very basic commands that you tend to use on a regular basis to update your site. And this one in particular is pertinent to this session in that often a problem that you come across might be an issue in a contributed module or some of your own code, or even in core. And the new way to apply patches to fix something in Drupal 8 core is to add a patch line to your composer.json file. And again, you're doing this all locally, running composer install and applying that patch instead of doing get patch or any of the methods that you used to use to apply these patches. So Composer is intimidating, it's frustrating, you'll get crazy errors that you don't understand, but really the basics are quite simple to understand. And like anything, the more you start to use it, the more, the better you get at it. This is another key one. Just recently, we were working with a client who had some Insight developers, and it wasn't Notepad, but he was using some text editor that had absolutely no code formatting or syntax highlighting, etc. So, and as I'll explain in the next slide, that's absolutely key when you're debugging things, to have an IDE, which are these top ones up here. And if you don't know, someone asked me the other day, why do you keep saying IDE? What is it? So it's an integrated development environment. And the difference between an IDE and code editors like Sublime Text or Atom, which several of our developers use, is things like Git integration and being able to check merge conflicts or add and commit files directly to Git within your IDE. Drupal integration. Actually, I'm not sure if these have, but for example, I use and recommend PHP Storm. When you install a new Drupal 8 site on PHP Storm, it says, hey, it looks like this is a Drupal project. That gives you Drupal code formatting up to standards, and more importantly, it does things like code completion, and it knows what Drupal 8's methods are, and so you can start typing something and it will automatically pop up for you. And it might be, I frequently find methods that I didn't even know existed because my code editor has found it for me. And so it doesn't matter which one you use, but the things you're looking for are error reporting. In other words, a good code editor will instantly show you when you have a typo that has broken your PHP with a red error mark, and usually a direct line to where that error is. Code completion, I mentioned, it's great to be able to just type class equals on a CSS something and have it pull up a list of all your active classes or a method, etc. We're going to, talk more about Xdebug in a bit, but PHP Storm in particular, when combined with one of those tools like Lando or Ddev or Doxel, this used to be like a 2 or 3 hour journey to get Xdebug working in your IDE. It's now out of the box. It just works, and you can press a button and get your debugging working. And then, of course, the Drupal integration and Git integration are also nice. Has anyone ever heard of or read this book by Neil Stephenson called In the Beginning Was the Command Line? If you haven't, it's a spectacular book. He wrote it long before he became more famous for other books. And it's sort of espousing the wonders of the command line. So again, I have this slide because it's simply not optional to be a Drupal developer and not have more than a passing familiarity with the command line. It's just a ingrained part of working with Drupal now, whether you're doing drush commands or spinning up your local site and running those sync commands that I was talking about earlier. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but I think this is the key one. I've been on the command line since 1994, I think, and I'm even today still learning things and finding efficiencies. And when we hire a new developer and I'm standing over their shoulder and they start typing a command and then start typing the same thing, it's like, just hit your up arrow and I'll, and seeing the people progress through that is always very rewarding. So very key. I'd also encourage anyone, a lot of times I'll see developers in the command line and they'll get to a file and I'll say, okay, open that file and make a change, and they'll be lost. And so it's very important to be able to invoke a text editor. I use Vim. I won't go too far into Vim, but it's a very powerful text editor. If you are ever bored sitting at your command line, type the word Vim tutor and you will get what they say is a 35-minute tutorial, which is complete lies. It would actually take about 2 hours to run all the way through. But it will give you the basics of how to navigate, edit, save text files in your command line. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but similar to Composer, I don't believe that Git is optional anymore. It's sort of the driving factor that sort of holds all of this stuff together, and a lot of new developers struggle with the basics, but again, similar to Composer, you could, there are many full books, large books on Git, and you could do a full day seminar on Git. But these are sort of the basics, and if you understand these commands, and some of our developers use GUI interfaces for their Git work, but I always recommend at least becoming familiar with the basic Git commands and how to use them and how to push your code. The other key thing about Git is that it provides safety, right? Like, you can be working on a fix on something and doing commits in a separate branch, knowing that you can always roll back, and if you push something bad to production, God forbid, you can always know that you're in a safe space with Git. Drush and Drupal Console, I'm going to talk a little bit more about Drupal Console later, but these are what I consider your magic wands, and if most people I think now know what Drush is, Drupal Console maybe not so much, but they are command line tools that allow you to directly interact with both your local development sites and your production servers, everything from status. This will bring back all sorts of things about your PHP version and your database connection and whether you got a successful group bootstrap. Of course, you can see here my aliases if you're not familiar with them. On all of those hosting platforms that I talked about, you get these things called server aliases that will point to your live site. So you can use Drush to directly interact with your live site. And in fact, that problem that I talked about right before I left on this trip, like many, many problems in Drupal, the solution was simply to run that cacher build on the live server, and my job was done. The error went away. And then Drush, of course, beyond these simple things, here's two other big ones that are often common issues that come up in a broken Drupal 8 site, and that one is that someone forgot to run update database. When a module changes or a field definition changes or something changes, and you install that module but don't run a database update to update the database definitions for whatever that might be, your site is very likely going to say website not available or throw some horrible error. This is how you fix it. Another very common scenario in Drupal 8 is the configuration management system, which again could be a whole separate session. But often people will export configuration to code, push it up to production, but then miss this step of importing it. And so that's a way to both check if it has been imported and to go ahead and import it if it hasn't. And then of course it gets much more advanced than that. And I'll have more on Drupal Console in a minute here. Chrome DevTools, this one's probably obvious. If you're not using it, you should be. You can inspect any page. This is the one that most people most commonly use. You can interact with your code and with your CSS to debug. This one, however, is your console window. And either a lot of people don't know about it or they forget to check because I don't want to put a percentage on it, but let's say a very high percentage of calls or tickets that come into our company that say, hey, this is broken or this isn't working right. One of the very first things I do is open console, and often maybe this will be on the back end, like, hey, this WYSIWYG editor is broken, or I can't upload this file. And often, right here in your DevTools console will be the exact error, the exact file that's causing it. It might be completely unrelated to your WYSIWYG. There might be an example where you've got a unrelated module and JavaScript is breaking the WYSIWYG for one reason or another. And then, of course, your job to find it. But it's almost the first thing I do when I'm debugging is open console and just check for JavaScript errors or files that aren't loading that should be. Here's another key one. This one got me out of a very difficult crunch. This is a PHP MyAdmin. There are several versions of this. It's a GUI interface for interacting with your database. Most of the local tools that I talked about have this or something similar integrated so that you can pull up your database. And one thing a lot of people either don't know or forget to do or just never occurs to them is that you can do a full text search on every single table on your database with a wildcard. And so we had an instance where this was early in Drupal 8 when we were still using Panelizer, and in the Panelizer UI, you drag a block from one region to another, save it, go check on the live site, it was perfect, everything was lined up. You'd then go back to the Panelizer edit interface, and your block had moved back to where it was before, and it was still in the right place on the live site, but basically the UI was lying to us. The configuration in code was exactly correct. I opened up the database table for the Panelizer config, exactly correct, but yet there was this problem. So I picked out a keyword from that error message, did a full text wildcard search on all of my tables, and sure enough, in a table that I didn't know existed at the time called your key value table was an entry for this Panelizer block, and it was being stored there instead of where it should be. And it sort of led to this chain of me figuring out exactly what was going on and how to fix it. And that's a very common thing where if you're just like, what is going on? Search your database. This one's not a joke. I add it here because I firmly believe that Googling is a modern day art form that a lot of people have not yet mastered, especially when searching for complex or obscure errors. There's a fine art to both, picking the correct search terms and making sure if you're searching for an error that you take out all the cruft and just search for just the specific things that you need, trying different sets of keywords, and be willing to go 4 pages in and start reading comments, and often you'll pick up other keywords that are somewhat related, or you might find a related issue that triggers something in you, so it's a very important piece of the puzzle. And then the need for speed. I bring this up because until about a month ago when I bought this computer, I was using what I considered a fairly modern day Mac with 8 gigabytes of RAM, I think an i5 processor, and it was causing me all sorts of problems. I was running out of hard drive space, and I upgraded to a computer with 16 gigabytes of RAM, a faster i7 processor, and the difference in my day-to-day work, I bet I shaved 10 to 15% of my time off every day waiting for cache clears or configuration imports or loading the admin pages. I was shocked at how much faster and enjoyable my work became when I upgraded that computer. Phase 2 tools and beyond. This was, okay, those first tools were, okay, this is going to get you through 90% of what you need, and all of the tools that I just showed you are going to do that, whether it's a cache clear or a config import, but there are other tools that are just as important. I'm going long here, so I'm going to do this quickly, but all of these have come from the devel module. They are commands that allow you to interact directly with your code and pass a variable to any one of these, and they all are going to display the same kind of information, but in different places on the page and in slightly different formats, and I'd encourage you to try different versions. This, of course, is how you would do the same thing in Kint, and this is letting you sort of see live in real time what variables are and what might be in a chain of arrays. All of the old school PHP debug functions are still, of course, available, and then xdebug that I talked about briefly. When all of this goes bad and you're still confused, xdebug is sort of the place to go that lets you set what are called breakpoints in your code, go to your page, you'll come back to your editor and be able to step through, step by step, seeing exactly what's getting passed where in any step of the operation. It's very powerful. The web profiler module is a module we just discovered. It used to be part of Devel. I think it's now split off. And simply by enabling this module, you get a toolbar at the bottom of your page that tells you everything from how many queries are running to, I won't even go into it, it's just this vast array of information about your active Drupal site. We're now using that on all of our local sites. It never gets enabled on production. Brush print allows you to quickly, I use this in, say, migrations where I'm not working on a web page, I'm working on the command line, and I need to see variables that are coming through my migrations. Brush print will just print those out for you right in your terminal. You can, of course, in Drupal 8 log your own error messages using the Drupal logger. And then there are other tools that make local development easier, like config split. We use that to keep things like web profile and develop module enabled only on our local copies, never on production. Okay, this comes back to my computer. I know everyone can't simply afford to buy a computer, but he made this point that the better your tools are, the more enjoyable and effective you're going to be in your work, and I firmly believe that, whether it's paying for a PHP Storm license or upgrading your computer and just doing whatever you can to make sure you have good tools. Okay, flat tire. This might be redundant, and if you've worked on Drupal 8, you may know most of these steps, but this is sort of the absolute basics for when you need to diagnose a Drupal site. So I just did a little loop here because the idea is in your head you're doing this over and over. This first one is probably key. Talk to your colleagues. I can't tell you how many times when I've gotten an error report, I'll just post to Slack like, hey, someone reported this, and immediately be like, oh, well, I installed this module 2 days ago, and immediately I'm down to Occam's razor, where the simplest solution is probably it, and I'm off to the races. The very first thing I do is either log in on the production site and just poke around looking to duplicate and just sort of looking for any obvious problems. Drupal 8 has a great status report that will give you basic information. Check to see whether your config's been imported. Like I said, open console, it will often bring you right to a problem. Check anonymous versus authenticated because you're going to see different behavior in different contexts. I often will pop open the site in incognito mode in Chrome or in a different browser to make sure that I'm not dealing with cached files in my browser. Of course, if you are getting any kind of errors or you know what you're searching for, it's the right time to start Googling. Remember Occam's razor, the simplest option is usually the right option in terms of what your problems are. Often people get, whether it's through a bad Google search or some misconceived notion, they overlook very simple things. And then I left this one last because, frankly, a lot of people do it first. Cache clear. I don't like to do that because, for example, in that instance that I brought up where that's all it took, well, I wanted to know what was going on before I did that, like what caused this, and I did discover that. Then I tried the cache clear, and it worked. But this will, frankly, on Drupal 8 solve a vast majority of just sort of common flat tires, road problems. It just works. It's not ideal to run it on a large, busy production server, but often that's the answer. And of course, nobody knows it all. This is a Drupal status report on a live production site that we have. This is a trusted host setting, and I get what are called error blindness. Like every single site I have has some little weird quirk or something that I've learned to ignore. In this case, Pantheon doesn't care about this trusted host file, and we've just never bothered to update our settings at PHP to accommodate for it. Most Drupal sites have one problem or another that simply never goes away. Okay, so now we're going to move on to, I have about 10 minutes left, so I really got to speed up here. Engine stops or won't start. If this ploy makes the starter operate as it should, the engine gaily starts to turn over. And his ploy is he's talking about crawling under your car with a giant screwdriver and connecting 2 giant bolts on your starter to bypass the solenoid and turn your engine over. And the first time I did that, it was the greatest feeling ever. And this chapter sort of talks about that process of, my car stopped, internal server error, what do I do? The next few slides are just common examples of what you might see. The website returned unavailable or a white screen of death. Frankly, those last 3 screens are all you should ever see on a production site. You should never see a stat trace or errors. This is good on your production site, but it gives you nothing. If you're logged in, you might actually get some errors depending on what you're doing. But you don't want those errors, and I'm going to get to how that works in a second here, but you don't want those errors showing on your production site. So step 1, do some triage. Go back and make sure you don't just have a flat tire before you start doing more. Get your log, and we're going to talk about this in a second. But often, as I described earlier, I will go right to step 2, especially if I've got a solid local environment, which I don't care about what's on the server logs. I'm going to get an exact clone and go local. So database logging, this is the module called Dblog. It will log Drupal system events and PHP errors, and it's great, with one big exception. And of course, when you click through, it'll give you your exact line number, file, and the function that's wrong, but the problem with dblog is that you simply don't want this running on a production site because for every one of those errors, it's writing to the database. So what I often do, if I'm not at my computer and I can't quickly spin up a local and I need to know what's going on, right from my command line, I will enable dblog on the production site. There's then a brush command called watchdog tail that gives you right in your terminal a live stream of your logs. I will then go trigger the error by doing whatever the client told me was going to make it happen. And right there, I'm watching on my screen the errors come through, and then I can immediately know, okay, it's this module or this file, and then immediately disable that. Syslog, how many people know what this is or run it? So Syslogs are a system utility, and it was a solution for not having dblog enabled on your site. Instead, it writes logs directly to a system file, specifically with Drupal. The problem is, this is very rarely viable. You can enable this on, say, Pantheon. It will do nothing because there's no way to access that log file. Acquia, on the other hand, has it running, and it's great. If you enable syslog, you don't ever have to worry about dblog, and they give you instructions on directly where to go to get your syslog. But frankly, we never use it because you can't use it on shared hosting, you can't use it on Pantheon. It's just it's great if you have your own server and set it up the proper way. And then there's this module which I just heard about, logs HTTP module. It allows you to push logs over HTTP to a paid, or I think there's a free service. So it's a way to have syslog without actually having syslog. I've not yet to use it, but I found it interesting. And then there's your server logs, which are, so Drupal, dblog and syslog write what are called Drupal system events. Specifically to Drupal, module developers can write logs. Server logs, like your Apache access or Apache error or PHP errors, will give you stack errors or PHP problems, but it won't have those Drupal-specific system events. So while valuable, not quite as valuable as your dblog or your syslog. Okay, so you've got your logs. If you've ever seen a log file, it looks like a bunch of garbage, and you have to read through thousands of lines of files, and you really need to develop the skill of ignoring the cruft. Especially on a stack trace, you might see 50 lines long, but only the 38th line has the line to your file, and it's a skill to learn how to read through those log files and search through them. I'll often open up a log file and immediately search for the keyword that I'm looking for to find that log, or often, again, if you trigger the error, your error will often be at the very bottom of the log. But often, somewhere, it'll point you to your exact problem. Okay, and we've talked about this before, but in an instant, you want to be able to spin up a local copy with zero friction. These are the commands that we use, depending on whether we're using Doxel or Drupal VM and Acquia BLT. Again, an instant path to a one-to-one state. Those commands I showed do all this automatically, but you absolutely need to do these in order to effectively debug or fix a Drupal site. You want to get pull from your master branch to make sure you have the actual production code, sync your database so that you have what's in the database in your active configuration, make sure that's updated, make sure your configuration is imported, and clear your cache. At that point, you are in a one-to-one state with production and can effectively start fixing things. Show your errors in settings.local, which is a file that comes with all of those systems that I brought up, or you can easily add it. This will enable error logging, and it will be the difference on your local site between this, which is what you want on production, and this, which is what you want in debugging, where it gives me the exact function or method that's wrong, the line number. That's what you want to see when you're trying to fix these problems, and by putting your error handling in settings to verbose is how you do it. In Drupal 8, you need to do a number of things in your settings.local file to enable what are called local development services. This is a manual step you need to do unless it's built into your local build tools. You want to disable all three. The page cache, by the way, is new in Drupal 8.4. There's now 3 caches that you need to disable. And then you want to typically disable your CSS processing and your JS processing. Again, that all happens in settings.local. And this is going to make sure that you are seeing the truth, not some version of the truth in a cache table or an aggregated file. Even if you're not doing front-end work, you should disable your twig cache and enable twig debugging. This is a file that comes in every Drupal 8 site in the sites folder. it gets included by that settings.local PHP file. This will give you, when you're looking at your source code, say in Chrome Inspector, it'll give you the exact name of the twig file that's outputting the code that you're looking at, which is critical to being able to then debug it. And of course, caching and reload help you see in real time what the truth is. Many people don't know this, and when I'm working with a new developer, I make sure they do. This is Chrome Inspector, DevTools. You click this settings bar, there's this spectacular option called Disable Cache, meaning your browser cache. Drupal 8 is notorious for caching JavaScript files or CSS files, and you can go open incognito or manually clear your cache every time you're trying to test something, but if you have Inspector open and this option is checked, you're set. Your browser will not cache. Okay, so you're ready to begin now. In my opinion, you know pretty much everything that you could know. You've got a local copy of your site, you have your error logs or you're outputting errors on your page, and now of course the hard work begins, like, okay, what do I do? And the session's obviously too short to go in too much to that, but the idea is that all these tools and this full understanding of the system has given you something to go on, and it's your job to sort of follow that trail. Okay, in my last 2 minutes, I'm going to do this quick know-how. If your cylinders are stuck, you can likely knock them loose with a rubber hammer. These are just tricks that I've learned over the years that can really help. So you can't debug stupid. Can anyone immediately recognize what's wrong with this? There's no second equal sign, which is which is how PHP checks for equality. Not too long ago, pushed a settings.php file to production with this, trying to redirect to HTTPS, and I've written this code 1,000 times, I could not figure out what was wrong. And until I walked away for an hour, I didn't realize that I was simply missing an equal sign. So no debugger in the world is going to fix that for you. This is a key one. Disable your custom modules and your theme. If you're struggling with something and you can't figure out where it's coming from or why it's happening, immediately switch to Bartik and rule out your theme, because often it's in a twig file or something in your theme, and the same goes for your custom module. And if you do that, you immediately know, like, okay, it's not something that we did, it's something else. Or alternatively, it is something that we did. Be destructive on the setup I described in a local development environment. You can just, if you know it's your theme and you know it's in a CSS file, chop out the bottom half. If it's a 3,000 long file, and you'll know, and you'll narrow down, okay, and then you can go to your front-end developer and say, hey, on line 49, here's your problem. How do we fix it? Here's another great one. Build your own debug views with views in VBO, often with Twig. It's outputting things that you don't quite understand. In VBO, you can build your own views and output all this stuff that the public would never see, whether it's entity IDs or revision IDs or timestamps that you can use to debug what you're seeing compared to what's actually in the data. Understand your cache. There's the Drupal cache, the ones I talked about. You've got those disabled. But then there's often varnish and CDN, and in fact, we were recently working with a client who was on Pantheon. There was all this weird stuff going on. I cleared his caches, I cleared the Pantheon cache, and I submitted a reply back to the ticket and said, this is still broken. He said, oh, well, we also have Cloudflare. So they were running two CDNs that I hadn't been aware of, and you just need to understand that there's all these places that Drupal can store things. Hence that critical requirement of doing this locally with no caching. Here's another great one. When you get to an issue queue on Drupal.org, start at the bottom, because some of these are 3,000 characters, they're 3,000 posts long, and you'll spend 20 minutes getting down to the bottom, and it's finally like, this is still broken for me, or alternatively, hey, this was great, when is it going to be committed? Go to the bottom, trust me. If you are Googling an error and you find nothing, it's probably you. It's very rare that you alone are going to come up with some unique bug that no one else has ever, it might happen 99% of the time. It's probably something that you are doing, and it helps. When I Google something and there's nothing, it really helps me refocus that, okay, this is probably something that we're doing. Okay, I'm a minute over. I have two more of these. If you're Googling, include the word programmatically. It unlocks this magic section of Google that no one else ever, programmers tend to write the word, hey, how do I do this programmatically? If you don't, you're going to get lots of posts about the UI. Compose or clear cache, do it. We used to do it periodically. We now do it as part of every build. Composer prohibits. This is a great command that will let you know why Composer is breaking and not letting you install. And finally, be persistent and methodical. There is an answer somewhere in those logs. I don't have time to do this, but Drupal Console has a wide variety of these debug commands that will go far beyond what Drush can give you, and from the command line can give you all sorts of things about route names, and frankly, I need to get up to speed on a lot of these. I sort of rediscovered Drupal Console a bit during this presentation, and that's it. So I hope you got something valuable, even if you were an experienced Drupal developer, and if you're new, I hope that you sort of have this big picture of how to proceed. So thank you. And I know I don't have time, but